And I will talk about what you're saying, because I think I
Yeah,
get
cool.
the gist of what you're saying. So, and I have to say that I had a similar issue, and I, you know, I don't know if it's really a point, frankly, that can be argued. I mean, well, it can be argued, but I don't know that it's one that can be proved. And I think I raised it with him, and maybe I didn't do it forcefully enough. But Andrew Hartman makes the argument, and there's a couple of things that I find a little bit slippery about his argument. One is that the culture wars are over. But he, it seems to me, defines it in a very narrow sense, which is the culture war. And I would say it's really more accurate to say this cultural battle that came from the 1960s social emancipation movements. So when you talk about feminism, when you talk about gay rights, when you talk about, I don't know, free love, maybe. Now, putting aside the fact, and he would argue that cultural battle, which he called the culture wars, because it was such a radical change, it is sort of a singular cultural battle, even though there'll be an ongoing sort of like simmering cultural war. But that was such a singular cultural battle that that's what's going to be the culture war. And he would argue, when you would say, but for a woman's right to choose, we're actually seeing it being rolled back in state by state. He would say, that's actually proof of my thesis, because they know they have lost the cultural war so much so that they can't fight that on a national level. They actually have to fight it in their little Alamos, which may be a state, not so small if you actually live there and you're a woman, but in terms of the argument that he's making, that's what he would say. They're actually sort of receding, retreating, and just trying to go to plan B, which is, rather than impose this on the culture at large, to create a subculture where that's the case. Okay, that would be his argument. He takes issue with, sort of ancillary to that, he takes issue with guys like Thomas Frank, who say that this culture war was largely ginned up, and I don't know if Thomas Frank would say this, but he sort of characterizes the argument this way, that there was really, that this culture war was more a function of, Thomas Frank would say, of it being ginned up for electoral purposes. And Hartman says, no, this was real for people, because you had, at the very least, people had this, and by people he means obviously like white Christian people, had this notion of what America was, even if they weren't living that life. They had this aspirational view of America, which was sort of shattered by the emancipation of women, minorities, black people, gay people. And I don't see that. To me, I think the answer is more in the middle at best. In other words, yes, some of this was real. There was definitely real losses. I mean, this is, if women can make as much money as men in the workplace and can have access to the same jobs, some men are going to lose their jobs because they've had an unfair advantage. If African Americans can compete with you, you're going to lose more often than you would have before, because you're competing against more people. If you believe gays come from a different planet and don't want to see them considered to be just people, and suddenly they are, you're going to feel some type of real loss. That all may be true, but the reality is, and I think the example of the Carter thing was perfect. When Carter's IRS went after, I think it was Bob Jones University, I'm not sure if I remember exactly who it was, and said, you're going to lose your funding because you can't continually racially discriminate. I think that's what it was. They went off and said, like, Jimmy Carter is attacking. And remember, Jimmy Carter, the first reborn Christian to enter the White House, it's my understanding. The evangelicals went ballistic. And it was all used for electoral advantage. I don't think back in that day you're going to hear much about that if it's not being promoted actively by people with political interests. So there can be affronts, but there also can be an exacerbation, an amplification of these affronts that can be perceived as broader oppression if somebody has the interest to characterize it that way. So I don't know that I buy the argument that just because it's founded on something that's real. And I don't even know that Thomas Frank would argue that this isn't real. I think it's just sort of like it's a sleight of hand. It's to use these cultural issues and translate them into to reinterpret them and use them as some type of electoral cudgel. Yes, I mean, there's no doubt in my mind that there is real loss that people are subjected to. I mean, it's obvious. It's just a numbers game, right? If we hire a half dozen more people in this office, the three of us who are here now are going to have less access to the bathroom on a regular basis because we're going to have to be waiting on other people. That's just the reality. Everybody looks a little worried in the office right now.